Well, welcome back to another episode of the Your Blank What Now podcast. My name is Marcy Nettles and I am your host. And today I am really excited about this episode. It's definitely one that touches my heart and really comes close to home for me and for my family as well. And I know that there are so many people out there that are going to hear this story today and they're going to think, oh my gosh, that almost sounds like me and what I have experienced or what I've gone through in one form or another. So I'm excited to be able to introduce to you our special guest today. We've got Jonny. He is the founder of Heart of a Mountain, director of military relations, and board member for Wild Warrior Adventure and an entrepreneur as well. He's a consultant and advocate for veteran programs. He is a retired staff sergeant from the United States Army. He served as an airborne infantryman during his active service, following a combat deployment to Afghanistan as a squad leader and serving as an Army instructor. He was medically retired in October of 2013, where being active for almost 12 years. Wow. He and his wife, Lindsay, have been married 17 years and live together in Colorado Springs with their three beautiful daughters, Sierra, Savannah, and Sky. I love the S thing you've got going on there. Together, they continue to follow God's calling in their lives to serve veterans and their families within the community, at their church and through their work with Heart of a Mountain and Wild Warrior Adventure. So I am so privileged, actually, and honored. And first, I just want to start off with a thank you. Thank you so much for your service, Jonny, while you were enlisted, but also now the work that you are doing after you've been retired and released from that commitment, and what you're doing for veterans in so many different aspects. So welcome to the show, Jonny. Thank you so much for being here.
Wow, what a welcome. Thank you, Marcy. I really appreciate this opportunity.
You are so welcome. You know, we met just, oh gosh, it's been probably about 6 to 8 weeks ago now. And when we first sat down together and we were having conversations across the table as we were having dinner after our event, and I got to hear some of your story then. I just knew that I needed to bring you on because I've actually been looking for the exact right person to be able to share this message. And the title of your episode is You're Suffering from PTSD. What now? So could you start us off and share with the What Now Tribe audience a little bit more about your background and even help us understand what is PTSD?
Yeah, absolutely, Marcy. It was really great, the conversation we had at dinner that night and getting to know each other. I think that's part of the journey of coming through PTSD, is being able to talk about what has happened to us. Because as we'll find out here later on, there's a lot of benefits to the experiences that we've been through and that God has brought us through in these times. For me, that culminated in my military service. So when we talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and if we're going to put a definition on that, you know, we could go to the DSM-5 or the DSM-6, which I think is currently being published with new definitions, but all fall in the same realm of the fact that PTSD is a diagnosis that you receive when you or somebody near you have directly experienced or witnessed a traumatic event that threatens life or serious bodily harm. So it's not an event that has to happen to you directly. It can happen to somebody else within your proximity. So I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, is that PTSD isn't something that just has to happen to you. It can happen to somebody else, but through your experience in that, you gain symptoms of PTSD. And there's a whole list of them, you know, nightmares, anxiety, major depressive disorder. So we can go all down this list. And it only takes a few of those to actually be diagnosed with PTSD. And what I don't think a lot of people realize is most people live with PTSD. Most of us do. So this is not an uncommon diagnosis to any of us. And I think the statistics, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but over 90% of our population suffers with some form or some different level of PTSD in some way.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So this is something that we all struggle with. For me, my struggle came not from childhood particularly. I had a pretty good childhood, a good upbringing. My parents were believers. They were young, new believers. They became believers after they had my older sister and I. And so I was raised in a Christian home. And so I was raised with morals and ethics in order to establish a biblical worldview at a young age, even to take that with me. So I say that to say that even those who were raised or grew up in a Christian home or grew up with these worldviews doesn't make you impervious to trauma, right? It may change your approach or your perception of the trauma, but it doesn't change the fact that we can still receive trauma. And one of the earliest times I think of in the Bible of depression and post-traumatic stress is, the story of Cain and Abel, and Christ, or I'm sorry, not Christ, but God comes down, and after the murder has happened, Cain kills Abel. He comes and talks to Cain and he said, Cain, why is your countenance fallen? Right then and there, right in the beginning of the Bible, right in the beginning of time, we already see post-traumatic stress and depression. So it's nothing new to us.
Right.
It's the diagnosis and understanding of it that's new to us, and a lot of it started with rape trauma. So that's where the initial conversation happened. But when we went to war back in 2001 as a nation, that's where the discussion about PTSD really started coming to light. And that wasn't even until close to 10 years into the conflict that we really started having those discussions and really started understanding what PTSD was.
Right.
So the whole military, the VA, the studies with the VA and everything brought it to light. So
that's really interesting. That's really interesting that you said that, because I hadn't really thought about that perspective. Because think about it, 2001 is not the first time that we went to war. It is not the first time that we had a horrific event happen that affected multiple people. And it doesn't take multiple people for an individual to have PTSD, by the way. We just want to make sure everybody understands that. But we've been at war for many, many, many decades, right? And so think about the people that were dealing with PTSD, and yet none of us really knew what it was. That had to have been really difficult for them, had to be difficult for the doctors that were trying to treat them. Just like any, other diagnosis that can come that someone is close to the first of.
Yeah, and we've stuck multiple labels on it over the years. During the Vietnam era, they called it shell shock, right? And they talk about the 1,000-yard stare and these recluse attitudes that come back from war, of these guys who just withdraw out of society and disappear into their land or property, and now they become the crazy guy with long hair and a beard and toting a bunch of guns around his property. And people don't realize that he was just living with the symptoms, or she was living with the symptoms of PTSD, and they were just coping the best way they knew how. And the way they were taught was to defend themselves, build up defenses, be prepared for a fight, even though a fight isn't coming. Because that's really what PTSD is. It's like an ingrained memory or trauma that just keeps reoccurring. So you just keep trying to react to it the same way over and over. And that can be misconstrued a lot of times. But yeah, the discussion is new, but the diagnosis is not.
No, it's definitely not. Yeah, it definitely isn't. And I think that we're actually seeing that it spans a much broader conversation than people that have been to war, for our men and women that have served. It has to do with anyone that has gone through a major traumatic loss, been involved in a traumatic situation. It could be a domestic violence, it could be car accident, it could be an untimely death of a loved one. We have Grief Share that we help with, and many people experience PTSD as they're going through their grief, and they don't understand that. So I think this conversation is way past due. And I know that you didn't learn all of this information about PTSD by reading a book. And Jonny, I've asked you to be really, vulnerable in sharing your story, and I appreciate you agreeing to do that. But can you share with us the experiences that you've actually been through, that you've now experienced PTSD and had that choice, in those circumstances that you could have broken down and stayed where you were at, but you really decided to move forward and break through?
Yeah. So the big culminating event for me is when I deployed in 2007 and 2008 to northeastern Afghanistan, Nuristan and Kunar provinces. And at that time, it was the height of the war. The fighting had really picked up momentum. So we were seeing a lot of fighters come across the Pakistani border into Afghanistan over the Hindu Kush Mountains. Where we were stationed was not too far from that border. So we were basically at the foot of the mountains where the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, the line was drawn on top of the Hindu Kush Mountains. So we would get a lot of fighters coming in, even to the point where it wasn't just Afghani fighters. We had Chechnyan fighters, Russian fighters, all coming to join what we called the AAF, the Anti-Afghan Forces, which was a combination of hired or contract killers, Taliban, maybe some Al-Qaeda elements in there as well. And so we were in a very conflicted zone. So we spent 15 months in this area in the Nuristan and Kunar provinces. And our battalion alone, I mean, we were getting in multiple engagements a day, not just our unit or not just my platoon or squad, but the whole battalion as a whole was getting in multiple engagements a day. And so you had a lot of fighting going on. And for us, we were constantly on the move. So we were constantly walking through valleys. Even if we didn't take contact or have some sort of direct engagement in a combat situation, just the fear of it or the expectation of it alone hammered the nail in of trauma right away, because you're constantly sitting there wondering when you were going to get shot at and where you were going to get shot at from. It wasn't a matter of if, it was when. So we were constantly on alert, constantly on high, constantly just heightened senses, always on the go. So the brain starts programming itself, you know, what they call neuroprogramming. And so it starts rewiring and preparing you constantly for this stuff. It's things that we had trained for years for. You know, you go through basic training and then you get to your infantry unit and you continue to do training there. You train for this stuff. So you've already kind of pre-programmed yourself and you're prepared for it. But nothing quite prepares you for the experience of extreme combat and extreme trauma that happens around you. There's only so much training you can do with, you know, fake blood and fake body parts to prepare you for what's about to happen, because the real deal is nothing like you'll ever experience. So towards the end of our deployment, we had received one last mission. And it was this mission to go establish a combat outpost, or what we call COPS, in a location in a village called Wanat. And we had been to Wanat before. It was about 14 kilometers from the base that we were stationed at, called Camp Blessing at the time. And they had shut down another base. They were going to move the resources to Wanat, and we were going to establish what we were going to call Cop Kaler, which would be named after our platoon sergeant who had been killed earlier that year, in the spring of that year. So we're in July at this point, and we go to Wanat, and we get there and we start establishing our fighting positions. We had been promised all these assets. So in our briefings, in our operation orders, we had been told that we were going to have all these assets available to us. So Spectre gunship, which is a big AC-130 with giant cannons sticking out of the side, was supposed to be on rotation. F-16 jets, the Apache helicopters were supposed to be doing rotations. We were going to have Predator, which is the UAV, would come and observe the area for us. So we were told we had all these assets going out there. What was really interesting is, you know, as we're preparing for this, I'm cognizant of the spiritual battle that's happening. And I'm watching young men, 19, 20 years old, saying, I'm going to say goodbye to you guys now because I'm not coming back. And what's really heartbreaking about that is they predicted their own deaths. And you know, those memories are ingrained. Even prior to the trauma, that stuff ingrained itself in the end after what had happened. So we leave, we get there, we start establishing. So within about the first 48 hours, all these assets start dropping off. So we start losing them. They start redirecting them to other areas of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So now we're just kind of sitting out there. We're at the base of a valley with 3 mountain peaks surrounding us. And we're sitting out there. Really, at this point, we have piles of sandbags and shovels and pickaxes, and we can't really build up defenses. So we just start digging down, hoping to get low, defilate enough that we can hide behind the pile of dirt and sandbags and one side of our Humvee, our vehicle that we had. So we had plenty of assets on the ground in order to support ourselves, but it wasn't enough to prepare us for what was about to happen. So after having it been there about 4 days, digging deep, building sandbags, at some point they did drop off HESCOs, which are basically big boxes that are like fences lined with felt, and you just fill them with dirt and they become giant building blocks. And you can build your defenses up with these things. You can put walls up. So they dropped off some HESCOs, but they dropped off a Bobcat to fill the HESCOs that was only half tank full of gas. So it was just enough to fill about 4 of them. And we built up one of the fighting positions for another squad because they were completely exposed. We built a little sleeping area, just things like that. The best we could do to make our situation as comfortable as possible.
About how many of you were there at that time?
There were 50 U.S. personnel on the ground and about 10 to 12 Afghan army personnel there with us. I can tell you, I really don't count the Afghan army guys. They usually when things happen, they would just set their rifles down and walk off into the wood line, or they would just lay down and stop fighting. And that is essentially what ended up happening anyway. But so the 4th day we were there is July 13th. And we woke up in the morning. In the military, when you get up, it's called stand to. So you get up while it's still dark prior to dawn. The adjustment of the eyes as the sun rises, the light is so hazy and so dispersed, it's hard for your eyes to properly adjust. So stand to is considered one of the most dangerous parts of the day. And that's usually when the enemy likes to attack or assault because it's harder to see. And at the same time, your night vision goggles don't quite work because there's too much light flooding them. So you're kind of in this catch-22 of a situation to where it's like, it's too bright to use night vision goggles. It's too dark for your eyes to properly adjust to the light conditions. So really dangerous time of day. So we're all awake. We're all getting ready. What we were going to do is our platoon leader, Lieutenant Brostrom, and my squad and a couple of the Afghan army guys were going to go do a patrol to look for a new observation post or an overwatch. And we could put the Afghan army guys up there and they could tell us if anybody was approaching our position from their overwatch position. So we did have an outpost or an observation post about 40 meters away from us up the hill, just a little bit on the other side of the bazaar from where we were. Excuse me. And but it just wasn't a very defensible position. It wasn't very good. So we needed something better. So we were up, we were ready to do this patrol and this mission. Stand to is happening. The sun was rising and we weren't quite sure what was going to happen. We had received a lot of ICOM chatter which is like little radios. And that's what the anti-Afghan forces use. The bad guys would use these little ICOM radios. So we were getting chatter over the last couple of days. We had met with the provincial governor down in the Afghan police station, and they basically told us, be careful, something's going to happen. So we knew something was coming. We weren't quite sure what or to what extent it was going to be coming. And the intel was a little broken. So what we were getting from our headquarters, the intel was not the best, or if it was good intel, it wasn't coming to us. So on that 4th day, on that morning, we're sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden we heard one rifle crack off. And just that one rifle is usually how the enemy signals everybody else that it's time to attack. So after that rifle cracked off, at that point, all hell broke loose. Just barrages of rocket-propelled grenades, or you've heard them referred to as RPGs. We were taking small arms fire from AK-47s, Dushkas, different weapon systems that the Taliban had used at the time. So essentially what had happened is they had coordinated an attack of, they estimate between 300 and 400 fighters that had completely surrounded our positions. So we were taking fire from all sides. Statistically, in the military, our odds were against us at that point. Usually the odds, they say, for a US trained fighter is a 1 to 3 odd. So now we were looking at facing 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 odds. So the odds were against us. And it was extremely violent, extremely kinetic right up front. I remember at this point, I think the endorphins and adrenaline had just kicked in so quickly and so intensely that I hallucinated. And it was probably for a fraction of a second. And in that fraction of a second, I remember talking to my wife, talking to my daughters, and even in my mind, they were still like little babies, 1.5 years old, and our twins were like 3 months old. So, they're all in little car carriers in my mind. And because that's how I left them when I left for Afghanistan. It was my wife and the 3 kids in little car carriers. And so I said goodbye to him again. I don't feel like I had properly said goodbye to him when I deployed to Afghanistan in the first place. So I said goodbye to him again. And in that moment, something really strange had happened. And this is where a little bit of difference of combat PTSD comes into play. Was I had actually determined at that point that it was okay for me to die. And when you come to a realization like that, or you come to a conclusion like that, that is something, and this will come in a little bit later, but that is really hard to undo, or basically unpromise yourself. And so that's kind of a defining moment where I say this is kind of where PTSD began for me, is in that moment where I made the decision that we're overwhelmed. There's a very good chance none of us are walking away from this.
Yeah.
And so I just made that determination and said, okay, this is it. And, well, you hear a lot of guys who have been to combat and they say, oh, combat's nothing like the movies. In a way that's true, but initially this was so intense and so ridiculous that it kind of felt like a movie. There were just explosions everywhere. I would move to one side of my position. I would get knocked out by an RPG explosion right next to me. I'd snap to and realize like, oh, maybe I took some peppered shrapnel in my hands and arms or in my legs. But other than that, everything's in order. I can still fight. Like I can keep going. And I'd move to the other side of the position, and that would happen again. So I'm moving back and forth. And all the time while this is happening, our OP up above us, it's called Topside, had been completely overwhelmed. We were losing guys left and right up there. They had actually gotten to a point, they'd gotten so close. They were standing on top of a rock. The fighters, the bad guys, were standing on top of a rock, shooting down into our position up there and shooting our guys.
Wow.
So they had actually breached our perimeter more than once, multiple times. So we're trying to reinforce that position while we're getting overwhelmed at our positions. It was just a chaotic situation, and guys are getting shot all around me. I remember one of my team leaders, he got shot in the back of the hand. He went down. Then the medic comes over to try to help him, and the medic gets shot in the back of his right arm. He goes down. It was just one after the other. And finally, that we were sending waves of reinforcements up. And at one point, the Lieutenant Brostrom, he came to me and he goes, hey, I got to get up to the OP. I need a guy to go with me. And I had this young specialist at the time. His name was Jason Hovader. And Jason had a heart for Christ and a beautiful voice. The guy could play piano and sing like nobody had ever heard. It was just incredible. And so him and Lieutenant Brostrom, so Jason Hovader and Jonathan Brostrom, they left my position, started running up the road. I threw yellow smoke and I was providing cover fire for them as they moved. And they rounded the corner to go to our OP. And that was the last time I ever saw them. After they had rounded that corner, they took machine gun fire from behind, and they were both shot in the back and died pretty quickly.
Wow, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And in total that day, we lost 9 guys. 9 guys were killed, 27 wounded, and evac'd off the battlefield. And eventually, quick reactionary forces, or QRFs, began to arrive and provide supplemental fighters and additional defenses. And so over time, we were eventually able to push them back, which was a bit of a miracle in and of itself, because it took almost 2 hours for what we call dust off. So the medical evac helicopters to actually show up and start getting our guys off. So, I mean, we lost one guy because he bled out because we were waiting so long, because the fighting was so intense. The airspace wasn't clear enough for them to actually get in. And because we were getting artillery fire from Camp Blessing, so 155 millimeter cannons firing rounds from over 14 kilometers away to defend our position. And so then the F-16 show up, the Apache helicopters show up, and even that night, all these assets that we were supposed to have originally are now
4 days
finally starting.
earlier.
Yeah,
4
now,
days earlier would have been really nice.
absolutely. And now they're showing up, and even that night, we had a special forces team show up with about 100 Afghan commandos, which is their special operations unit. So they went out and they started chasing these guys all through the woods. They were able to capture a couple guys, or well, not capture, they took them out, let's put it that way. And come to find out, there was going to be a follow-on attack. So we ended up going down to the police station where we were initially doing meetings the day before, and they had weapons and ammo resupply ready to go for a follow-on attack. So they were savvy enough to plan, but there's a little fault in command there to where they had been going to Wanat for a year. Our command up to the brigade level had been going there saying, we're going to put a base right here. So they had a year, these Taliban commanders had a year to plan and coordinate and supply these attacks, which is plenty of time, ample time. And so they were able to do that. But, that wasn't the end of it. They were able to take that same element. And I don't know if you've heard of the movie The Outpost, Cop
Yes.
Keating. So that same element a year later had moved basically down the Hindu Kush Mountains a little ways and tried to recreate that same plan on Keating, and that's kind of where that movie came out of. But it was that same element, those same commanders, the same plan that they attempted. So they practiced it on us and went and tried to do the same thing. But so theirs was considered the most violent, ours was considered the most bloody. Or the deadliest battle. So
so you had 50 US soldiers that were there when this really all went down. 7 were lost, 27 were injured.
9 killed.
9 killed. Okay.
And
oh my
27
goodness.
were wounded in action. Yeah.
Okay. Oh my gosh. So how about you? How were you at the end of this battle?
Fairly unscathed. Like I said, I took some peppering of shrapnel. I'd been knocked out a few times by these hand grenades and RPGs. It was honestly a miracle that I walked away from it. I had finally made my way up to the OP as well, and me and this other gentleman named Sergeant Grimm. Like, if you're ever going to be in a fighting hole, you want to be with a guy named Sergeant Grimm, right? So we're sitting there, and I don't know, like, we're pushing these same forces that are trying to push back to the lines of our base, or the lines of our observation post, trying to get back in. And so we were just throwing hand grenades. I don't know how many hand grenades we threw that day. And so we would take a barrage of fire, we'd lay down while we're taking the barrage of fire, just throw hand grenades. And then when the fire stopped, we'd get back up, we'd look and see where the positions are, because where we were, there's a valley or a little draw right below us, and that's where they were kind of sneaking up and popping over the top and shooting. So we just kept throwing hand grenades, and that went on for hours. And they continued to fire RPGs at us. They had figured out that there was a tactic they were using where they would fire the RPGs, and if we were low enough in the position, they couldn't hit us. But there were mulberry trees all around us. So they figured out that they could shoot into the branches of the trees, and the RPGs would explode and spray shrapnel down into our positions. So it was like they had figured out their own form of proximity explosion.
Yeah.
Little archaic, but it worked. And so they were taking guys out like that, and that had happened all around me multiple times. And every time I'd do this check and see if I'm bleeding, and I'd walk away. And
Wow.
I didn't understand this, Marcy. Like, this is something that I really, really struggled with, that kind of compounded my symptoms of PTSD through this traumatic experience. Was, why not me? Like, why did I get to walk away from this?
Yeah.
Why am I so unscathed? Not completely physically unscathed, but compared to the other guys, I was doing all right.
Yeah. I've heard that from many people, many different soldiers that have returned from battle where they lost people that they were arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder with in the fight, to where the person next to them ended up not coming home, and they did.
Yeah.
And that was something that was probably the most difficult thing, is
Yeah, it really is.
why not me? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, even that vision of watching Hovater and Brostrom run off, and that was the last time I ever saw them, except for them getting carried off on a stretcher.
Right. Even
Um,
even though you didn't see them get shot, I bet your mind has played a video of it happening.
yeah, I think
Oh,
about it all
wow.
the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I didn't understand the extent of injuries, both mentally and physically, I had taken at the time. Because even after that, I mean, we basically ended up shutting the base down, packing everything up, and going home. It was like, gather up your toys, boys, we're going home. And so packed everything up. We went back within the next 48 hours. We did our memorial ceremony for our fallen brothers, and then we were on the birds home. We were going home at this point. So within 10 days of leaving the theater, or within 10 days of the fight, we had left the theater and we were home. We were getting out on the parade field. I mean, I remember they sent us back to Bagram, and they did all our medical out processing and said, you guys are cleared to go home, and gave us these little baggies of pills. And that's about the last thing I remember. They just said, take these pills every few hours, and or every so many hours. And I don't know what that stuff was, but I tell you what, I don't remember like the whole trip home. I mean, I think they were like, man, we had just beaten the crud out of these guys. Like, we don't want them freaking out. So let's just sedate them and get them back home, and they can deal with it there.
Yeah, they didn't need you freaking out in a bird. You didn't need
Exactly.
to.
No, so yeah, they don't want us freaking out on a
Oh
14-hour
no.
flight on a C-130, or a
And no,
commercial.
and that there's absolutely no disrespect in me saying freaking out. It's just a
No.
term, right? Of what can happen when you've been in something like that, and
Yeah.
then being confined in a small space too. So you were medically retired in 2013.
Yes.
Was it PTSD that led up to that, or were you injured in other battle?
No, so that was it. That's basically the primary symptom that they ended up medically retiring me for. So once we got back to Italy, where the 173rd was stationed, um, there was about a year that I remained there to finish up my tour of duty with the 173rd. And during that time, like, things started surfacing. And I didn't understand what it was. Like I said, the conversation of PTSD was fairly new at the time. And it was little things like going out on the range and going into a live fire situation. And then all of a sudden, I just started breaking down crying. And I had no idea why. And I had this young lieutenant pulling me off to the side saying, "Hey, Sergeant Benton, like, what's going on, man?" I'm like, I don't know. I can't tell you. And so they ended up reassigning me to the 7th U.S. Army NCO Academy. So we moved to Germany so I could be an instructor there. And the promise was like, oh, this is going to be great. You're going to have a predictable schedule. It's a 9 to 5. You'll have time with your family. Well, training in doctrine positions, or TRADOC positions, don't have predictable schedules. And so I ended up working a job where I was there at 4 in the morning and I wouldn't leave till 6 or 7 in the evening, because we had students, we were instructors, we were teaching constantly, we were inspecting their equipment, inspecting their rooms. So this like compounded that stress, and I had to push it all down, and it started surfacing and boiling out in different ways, to the point to where, fortunately, I had a good senior instructor at the time, and he pulled me off to the side and he goes, "Hey, Sergeant Benton, like, you got to figure out one of two things. We either need to get you out of the military now, or you need to go talk to a doctor."
Yeah.
It's probably one of the best things anybody had ever done for me. Because at that point, like, if I was going to get discharged like that wasn't going to look good. It wasn't going to be a good discharge out of the military. So I said, all right, look, I'm a good soldier. Like, I'll Roger up. You tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. So I went and talked to a doctor, and that, within a few months, it pretty rapidly started the process of me getting medically discharged out of the military. Because then a lot of physical stuff started surfacing as well, things that I hadn't realized that had happened. And turns out I had like a blood clot on my spine in my sacrum. And honestly, I just had that removed last year. They just figured that out, but that was all just from the explosions and the trauma that I experienced there. And so all these things were just boiling up, and they said, "Look, man, you're broken." That's not a fun thing to hear by any
No.
means. That's not something you should really tell somebody, is, "Hey, you're broken. We can't really use you anymore. We're just going to go ahead and retire you out. And that way we don't have to deal with you." It's just kind of like felt like this gentle shove out the door. And, the best part about it was the way God works in these things is because we were overseas, there were only three places I could go, which was Walter Reed in Virginia, Brooks Army or Maryland, I'm sorry, Brooks Army Medical Center in Texas, or Joint Base Lewis McChord up in Washington. I'm like, none of those are close to home for me. I'm from Colorado. Like, can I go to Fort Carson? They're like, no, sorry, you got to go to one of these major warrior transition battalions in order to get back stateside. Came back next week, and this is where God kind of started working in my life on this stuff. And they said, oh, those three units are full, so you get to choose where you want to go.
Thank you, Lord.
I was like, big man upstairs. Thank you very much. So I said, send me back to Fort Carson. And so we were able to get back to Colorado that way. And
Oh, that is so good. That's so good.
yeah,
So PTSD has been part of your life for quite a while.
yeah.
And do you know, or what are your thoughts on how your combat PTSD has affected like your worldview? And has it been different? What's the difference between when you were still active military to where now you're retired and you're a civilian? Can you help us understand how that changes and what the progression looks like?
Yeah. So after getting medically retired, it definitely ripped off a Band-Aid for me. I had established this idea in my mind that the military was all I'm good for.
Hmm.
I was born and raised in the military, in the Army. I was born in Army Tripler Hospital in Honolulu, Hawaii. So that's what I knew my whole life. And then to basically be told, uh, you're a broken toy. We can't play with you anymore. See you later. You're going to the toy box for good. And it's kind of like, ouch, that really hurt. So coming out of that, it really compounded the struggle, right? Because here I had my established support structure that I thought was going to help me through all of this. And that was ripped away. And I was basically given this broken system called the VA, or Veterans
Oh boy.
Affairs.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to rely upon that. And that was probably one of the most difficult parts, because I had expected this system to take care of me. And so I had this struggle between a worldly worldview and a biblical worldview of saying, like, the world has to help me. The world is going to heal me. The world is going to provide everything I need. And they provided stuff, but it was, let's see, when I came out in 2013, I was on 23 prescription medications a day. I mean, I was taking handfuls of medication. That was breakfast, was pills. And I was comatose. I was almost just this walking zombie. My wife, you could look at me, like pictures of the time, my face was just swollen. Like I just looked like a dying corpse walking around. And I felt like a dying corpse walking around. And so that really challenged me to think about, what's right? Where am I going to truly find my healing in this? And so the struggle with PTSD it resulted in multiple attempts at suicide, trying to take my own life, and because I had lost perspective of what was really going to help me. And I just thought I was losing the battle slowly.
Yeah,
And
this is where our stories kind of really intersect a little bit.
yeah,
With me, with my car accident from law enforcement, losing my career because of that car accident. I mean, with me, I felt like that was my purpose, right? And so when the car
right.
accident kind of took that from me, I went through the same things. And so it's almost like throwing the baby out with the bathwater when they tell you you're
Yeah.
broken and they just kick you out and you feel like your purpose is gone.
Yeah.
Where it
Yeah. You
sound,
lose purpose.
yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, that is so key that you say that, because that's the thing is you were fully engaged in what you thought you were called to do.
yes, committed.
Committed 100%. And then that is taken away from you inadvertently. It's not even your choice, really. This is you being told what's going to happen. Right. And now all of a sudden you go from having a purpose, having mission, having direction, to your only purpose and mission and direction is to show up to your appointments on time. You need to stop being such a pariah to society with all your symptoms and your anger and your freaking out and all that stuff. And so it's like, man, I really used to be something once, and now they don't need me anymore. And now what good am I? And it was that feeling of worthlessness for me that really drove me to that point to where it's like, well, I've got nothing to offer. How is the world going to miss me at this point?
Yeah. Well, and then you also had it compounded by those baggies of drugs that they kept giving you.
Yeah, that
Because
doesn't help.
no, it doesn't help at all. So losing what you thought was your purpose and reason for being here, did you suffer from brain injuries?
Yeah. So TBI as well. And,
Yeah,
later on, as you know, they found out that actually compounds the effects. It's
exactly.
one thing on top of another. So,
And the prescription medication on top of it compounds that.
yep.
And so
Yeah.
all of those things compounded together, it's not who you are as a person that would commit suicide, but it is all of the compounded experiences that you went through.
Yeah. It's
So,
just,
and yeah, you're
it's
so not
just so
alone.
overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's so overwhelming. And, I mean, I feel a little bit ashamed talking about it, but at the same time, I don't want to be ashamed about it. It was a struggle I went through, and clearly God brought me through it. He's not letting me leave this earth for some reason. I don't know what it is, but uh, he kept me through the fight. He kept me through the struggle of the symptoms of PTSD and the attempted suicide, and um, even continued sickness and illness that I deal with from my time in the military. He just keeps bringing me back. He's got me around here for something.
Absolutely,
And
he does.
yeah,
Absolutely. And I know that you're involved in a lot of it already, and you've got more that's going to be coming for sure.
yeah,
It's kind of interesting because you were talking about how you were being a pariah to
yeah,
the community. And, when you think about it, it's like PTSD, it's not just the individual that it affects, it is your family. I am sure that
yes,
your wife has got several stories that she could share about being the wife of someone suffering with PTSD, as well as your kids and then your neighbors and the community. PTSD is a bigger beast than most people realize it is. Can you share, what those residual effects are that your loved ones and the people around you have had to deal with previously? Because I know you're
absolutely.
you're you're on a much better plane now, but it's been, you've been on this path for a while, and there's other people that are going to be listening to this that maybe are just joining in the PTS path and walk,
Yeah,
or have been doing it for a while and haven't been able to find their way forward. So if you could share that, please.
yeah, absolutely. This is such an important question, Marcy, because there's little understanding, and there's a lot of research going on right now that actually talks about contact trauma, about not having to experience, but having to be around the person who is struggling with these traumatic experiences. Waking up at all hours of the night with nightmares. Or my wife. There's many times where she just can't sleep because she just wants to sit and listen and make sure I'm okay and that I'm sleeping restfully. So she's losing sleep over this, and then having to watch. So I would go into these moments where I literally black out from the TBI and from the trauma. I would actually have these like blackout moments, and I would absolutely freak out to the point where I was causing self-harm. Like I would be punching myself and giving myself black eyes, and I've broken my own ribs. And as soon as you come out of this stuff, it's just that overwhelming sense that just completely takes over, and it feels like you're standing outside of your own body watching this stuff happen. Oh, and by the way, my wife's standing right there watching it happen. So when we talk about, PTSD having a residual effect on people, it's because they're right there experiencing it with you. When your family members are there, your caregivers, your spouses, your kids, they're all watching it happen right there. So PTSD does have that residual effect to where, and it's like tar, it comes off of you and it sticks to other people. I mean, it is just nasty, nasty stuff. The effect that it has on other people. So yeah, I mean, my wife and my daughters have all watched me walk through this journey, and it breaks my heart. I don't wish this upon them, and it's not something that I intentionally wanted to put them through. But yeah, they absolutely deal with their own trauma in this themselves. And for me, it took me a long journey to actually figure out, like, oh my gosh, like how much damage have I done? Is there any way I can come back from this? And I could have taken one of two paths at that point. I could have gone down the path of saying like, well, damage is done. I guess I'm just going to have to live with it. Or there's other path of like, I got to stop doing this. I have to stop doing this to my family because they didn't go through what I went through. They don't need to experience this. It's not their fault. by any means. So me taking it out on them does nothing, and it didn't make me feel any better, yelling at them or cussing or throwing stuff or punching holes in walls never fixed anything. It just made the problem worse. And so they have been incredible troopers to just continue to support me and follow me through this. For me to be able to say I've gone through this journey, and here my wife and I are looking at celebrating our 18th anniversary in October. Gosh, we beat the statistics. I mean, military families, like, they have a 90% divorce rate, especially amongst combat veterans. And that typically, the extent is about 7 years in most marriages. So we're going on 18. I'm like, yeah, I'm looking to triple the statistic, so I'm going to keep going. And, that's the fight that we're in now, is to continue to fight. We got to fight for our minds, fight for our hearts, fight for our marriage.
Yes.
And in
Yes.
the healing, I didn't figure that out right away, Marcy. Like, that was a long journey to get to that point. So if I am going to say anything to anybody, is don't stop the fight, stay in the fight, because it does get better, right? Like, I've sat in front of many doctors, and I've actually had doctors say, hey, I can cure you in 5 sessions. And short of saying some 4-letter expletives to them, I said, no, you can't. There's no way. The only way you could cure me right now is if you hook me up to some machine that erases these memories. And you're not going to do that. But what it boils down to is sometimes what we think is a weakness or brokenness is actually a tool for strength.
Yes.
It's like the experiences we go through aren't meant to break us down, but to build us up and make us stronger. I mean, that's the same concept as a muscle. You have to break a muscle down to get it stronger, right? To build back more muscle. And so as I go through this journey, that's something I have to keep in mind, is like, I didn't go through that because I was weak or broken or I deserved to be living like this. I don't think anybody deserves to live with trauma. It's just part of our world. It's the sin nature of where we live. Trauma is going to happen because we're surrounded by sin. We're surrounded by evil, murder, death, you name it. We're seeing plenty of it in the world today, right?
Yeah.
It's all around us. But what I can say is that, no, this can break me down, but it's going to build me up to even be stronger. It's going to give me a foundation of something to work with. And like I said earlier, I don't know why I'm still around here. God clearly has a bigger purpose for me because he keeps me around. So I can either accept that and move forward in greatness, knowing that God has greatness chiseled out for us because he's guaranteed us victory, right?
Yeah.
So I can
So
either follow that
Jonny,
path, or I can get stuck, back in the past, constantly wallowing, wondering why me or why not me.
yeah. So it sounds like you have a lot of faith.
Yeah.
I would really like for you to explain how faith and PTSD can coexist.
Yeah. Great question. There's this is hard. Honestly, this has been the hardest part about struggling with PTSD, because I've even heard people say, oh, depression and anxiety is a sin. It's like, oh, well, that's just more motivation or necessity for me to just eliminate myself and wipe myself off this earth because I'm just living in sin. And it's not really about that. In the long run, what it was for me was, it wasn't about me living in sin, but living in reliance on the Lord. Like I said, I was raised in a faith-based home. My parents introduced me to Christ when I was young, and that's been a pivotal part of my journey and who I am as a person. But when you go through something like that, and that level and that extreme amount of combat, you're just like, man, does God really exist that he'd allow this to happen? It's kind of like, actually, yeah, it is one of those things, because he allowed it to happen. I mean, for me in my life, he allowed it to happen because it took me on a journey to now I have this experience. I have this ability to speak a different way to a population that needs some hope. And that's where I get to do this with continually with combat veterans. Even so, like Wild Warrior Adventure, like you mentioned earlier, it's, we take combat veterans fly fishing for a week, which is really awesome to have a great experience to go fly fishing. It's kind of one of those bougie events that not everybody gets to do. So we get to take these guys and do some really cool stuff. But at the same time, it gives us an opportunity to sit down and have conversations with these guys and talk about what God is doing in my life. And for me, that's been the most healing aspect of the journey, is as I talk to how God has been in my life, the fact that he brought me out of that stuff, that he keeps keeping me around for some reason, is testament to the fact that there's more to this journey than just our trauma. Our trauma is just something that has happened to us. It is not who we are, right? Does it define who we are? Yeah, there's definitely truth behind that, but that's the chiseling. This is how I explain it to most people is I say, a sculptor doesn't start with a perfect piece of stone, right? They start with this big, broken, jagged piece of stone. And the sculptor takes his chisel and his hammer and he chips away at it a little at a time. Sometimes it's small chunks, sometimes it's big chunks, right? Sometimes we're taking off big chunks. And that's how I look at it is in order for God to really shape me into the person or sculpt me into the person he wants me to be, sometimes he's got to hit me with a hammer and chisel, and slowly shape me into what he needs me to be. Because it's not about my will, it's about his will be done.
And it doesn't always feel good.
No. There's struggle in the growth.
Amen.
Right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there certainly is. So what would you say to someone that is in the depth of PTSD, stuck right now and just doesn't know what to do next? What would you say?
I'd say you can make it through this. I don't want to sound cliche in this, but don't quit. It's all about putting one foot in front of the other. I was reading in Luke today and it hit me really hard, where leper says, Christ, if you're willing to heal me, would you? And Christ says, I am willing. You're healed. And it's just remembering that like God does want to heal you, but he wants you to want to be healed, right? So he is willing, but are we willing? Are we willing to be healed, or do we want to be stuck in this position? So what I'd say to you guys is, don't be willing to stay where you are. There has to be growth. There has to be movement forward. Pursue that, chase after it. And even later on in that passage, the Pharisees were questioning Christ, and he looked at the man and he said, pick up your mat and walk.
Yes.
So there's an aspect of it where we need to be active in our own healing process and deciding that we need to get better. We need to take what we have and do something with it. We can either look at it as a curse or we can look at it as a gift. And if we change that perspective just a little bit, and we say, honestly, this is a gift. I've been through this. Now I can talk to other people about it. I can begin my healing process, and I can link arms with my brothers and sisters who are struggling with the same thing and walk through them with it. Right. So it's the two sides of the coin, right? You can look at it as I'm broken and I'm going to be broken forever. Or you could say, I've been broken, but I've also been redeemed. I've been healed. I've been fixed. Like God wants to heal me, and I want to help others see that healing and experience that healing too.
Yeah. And that they're loved and accepted exactly where they're at.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. That's a great, great answer. Thank you for that. So now I want to ask you, if you could go back to yourself on that fourth day when you said that you had decided it would be okay if you died, what would you say to yourself coming from where you are now?
I always imagine a little kid putting their hands on my cheeks when I talk, and I could just see myself doing that, putting my hands on my own cheeks and saying, this is going to hurt really bad. It's going to hurt really bad, but you're going to be okay. You have something that nobody else has. You made that decision a long time ago to put Christ in your heart. He's going to protect you, but it's going to hurt. So don't quit. Don't give up. Push through it. And I promise you're going to come out better on the other end. I promise you. And boy, I wish I could have told myself that.
I think that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you have. So, Jonny, we know that the experiences that we go through that don't kill us make us stronger and better to be able to do the things that we've been placed on this earth to do. Will you please share with us what you are involved with? I know that in your intro, I mentioned some stuff, and I know that you mentioned fly fishing, but what are you doing now to really love on and support and lift up veterans, or really around the world? What are you doing?
Yeah, it feels like I have many forks in the fire. But that's just been a beautiful progression of what God has brought me through to this point. So, like we said, the work with Wild Warrior Adventure is really incredible. And folks can find out more about that at our website. It's wildwarrior.us. And that's where we take veterans on a 1 week fly fishing trip. They're combat veterans struggling with PTSD. And we spend on those 5 days that we're together, we spend the first half of the day just in guided questions and discussion. And in that, we talk about God, we talk about our pose and the different things that we struggle with as men. And it gives us an opportunity to share Jesus with them. To me, that's all I want to do. And then at the end of the day, we get to solidify that conversation and discussion by going out in boats and going fly fishing. It's really great, and that discussion just really drives the topics home, usually that happens on the boats between guys. And then, so that's really incredible. I really love that. We do about 6 trips a year with that.
One question on that
Yeah,
though. Do they need to be believers to be able to participate?
absolutely not. We've had atheists come through. We've had people from Muslim backgrounds come through, all kinds of stuff. So we're not there to force anything upon anybody. What we're there is just to love on you, show you the love of Christ, and give you a great opportunity to just get out and enjoy God's creation and his nature on a river out in the wild. Like, it's just really incredible. So
Sounds amazing.
um,
Sounds amazing.
yeah, I definitely have a heart and passion there because I love fly fishing. Like, that's my medicine, is getting out, on the river, going snowboarding, and just being out in nature. So that's huge. But so when I got medically retired in 2013, I started working in the veteran nonprofit world. And so I've been working in various different programs and different types of programs that has eventually evolved this new concept that I'm putting together now with some really great guys. And I saw some gaps that were happening within the care for the veteran community. We talked earlier about the contact trauma that happens with families, and it's great that we could do something like Wild Warrior Adventure and get the veteran out of their home, have them for a week. But then when we send them back home, they're usually on a camp high for 2 weeks to a month. And then that kind of wears off and they slip right back into the stuff that they had been dealing with initially when they left in the first place. So God really put in my heart. And actually, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how God influences us, right? So
Yeah.
through my PTSD and through my trauma, so this last December, I got really sick. So, I got the COVID, and it got me really sick. And I I was laying in bed, and some of the trauma that's happened to my body has made it do some weird stuff. So I ended up with a blood clot in my leg, a DVT, or deep vein thrombosis, and that broke loose and lodged itself promptly in my lungs. So here I was again, faced with another life or death situation, because a pulmonary embolism is a 50-50 chance. And during this whole time, I came under like extreme spiritual attack. It's pretty crazy. I'm not a big ghosty guy, but this one was definitely physical, mental, spiritual, like all of it. Like, I was finding myself in dark places that I hadn't experienced before. But coming out of it, God really gave me a vision, and all of this culminated into this vision that we're calling Heart of a Mountain. So as I was healing and as I was coming out of this nastiness, I remember sitting up in bed. I wasn't sleeping, but I was just having these really encouraging thoughts. Like, it was just like the Lord was ministering to me. And I even think about like Jesus out in the wilderness when the angels were ministering to him for 40 days. I mean, now I know what that feels like, because I just felt like I was getting ministered to as I was going through this healing process. All of a sudden, 4 o'clock in the morning, sit up in bed, and I have this vision that's just so clear. I type it out. It's about 3 pages long, of this organization that we're calling Heart of a Mountain. And we're big Lord of the Rings buffs. So that's kind of, well, The Hobbit, honestly, is where the Heart of the Mountain concept came from. But that's really what it's about, is that at the heart there, it doesn't take much to create this big mountain of a mission and to do great things. And at the same time, we were like, oh, well, that's also like when you do the acronym, it's home. So we came up with that a long time ago, but we weren't quite sure what it was for. And then I set up with this vision to where we actually want to get into the veterans' homes, those who are dealing with combat trauma and PTSD and physical affliction, and get into their homes and eliminate distraction through. So through Heart of a Mountain, we want to create a database where veterans and their families can get on there and list the needs that they have in their home in order to provide improve environmental safety and security. So the goal is to eliminate the distraction, create a healing environment, and then offer them the tools to grow as a family, as a couple, as a core unit, right? Like as an organic team. So we're going to do that. We're going to get in there. We're going to make these improvements, and then we're putting together a coaching program that'll take them through about 12 weeks of coaching that they dedicate themselves to where we just give them those tools and the steps necessary, and then keep them accountable in that, so that they can take this new healing environment that they have and put it to good use, and actually see that they can make progression, they can make growth within their life and as their family. Because, like I said, lots of great organizations out there, awesome organizations helping the veteran. But at times, I've heard so many times the veteran goes home and the family goes, well, what about us? Here are veterans healing, but we also experienced the trauma, and we've had to deal with this guy or gal for so many years now. Now they're moving ahead and healing, and we're still stuck. We're still right here. We're not moving forward. And so that's the thing, is we want to get in there and we want to address it as a whole. We want to bless the families. We want to bless the veteran, because they've all been through it too. And we
Yes.
just want to love on them. And if anything, if that means I can get my foot through the door and pray in their environment, then that's what I'm going to do. Sorry, guys and gals, but I'm going to be praying over you. Like, that's how this works.
Yeah, you know what? And I love that. Absolutely. It sounds like a perfect 1-2, right? A perfect 1-2. The
Yep.
wild warrior experience, fly fishing for the
Yeah.
the veteran, and then the two being the heart of a mountain inside of the home.
Yeah.
I love that. That is so good. And is there a website for Heart of a Mountain, or is it also part of Wild Warrior?
No website yet. That's coming.
Okay.
We're still in a developmental phase. So we have the understanding of the structure of how we're going to build the environment or build the organization. We actually have an app that's going to be developed in order to do that coaching, so that the family can remain in contact with a coach, and make sure that their accountability points are tracked within the app. So that'll be coming. And then the website with the database will be coming. Like I said, this is very fresh, very new, but it's moving very quickly. People believe in it. People love it. And honestly, like I said, I believe this is from God. So, he promises victory, and I haven't done a whole lot of work on it. It's all just happened kind of naturally and organically, because when you're living in God's will and you're trying to further his kingdom, last time I checked, the Bible said he's going to bless you in that. And that's where we're at right now, is we're just feeling very blessed, and things are moving forward so quickly and so fast. I mean, there's some stuff that's happening. I can't even talk about it, but it's huge.
I'm
Like,
excited for you. I am excited for you, but I'm excited for all of the veterans that you're going to be serving.
oh,
You know,
absolutely.
being the mother of a veteran, and knowing that it's not just the individual again that goes to war. It's a family affair. And so
Yeah.
I absolutely love that you are actually blanketing this area that has been such a miss. Families have been such a miss in being
Yeah.
cared for and taken care of. Veterans, it's, oh my gosh, we know that the problems there, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to veterans and families, I think it's going to be such a blessing that you're going to be helping to cover that area and bring healing to the whole family structure. So how can our audience follow you? I've got the website for wildwarrior.us. And then
Yeah.
how else can our listeners, the What Now tribe, follow you?
So they can follow me on Facebook, just Jonny Benton, Jonny, and then Benton. So feel free to follow me on Facebook. Usually try to post encouraging stuff that's happening currently with Wild Warrior. And, we'll be posting a lot more as Heart of a Mountain grows. You'll see that. And then also on Instagram, my tag on there is Paniolo_Jonny. Paniolo is a Hawaiian word for cowboy. So that was a nickname given to me back when I was surfing in California. So it's Paniolo, PANIOLO_Jonny. And that's on Instagram.
Okay, awesome. All right, so final words. What is the final word that you would like to give for the audience? What do you have to leave us with?
Well, first and foremost, to all our veteran, active, guard, reserve, police, firefighter, EMT, thank you, thank you, thank you. We know the sacrifice each and every one of you is making, and we're behind you. We support you. We love you, and just stay in the fight, because when you come out of the fight, we're still here for you. And for those who are struggling with PTSD, all those who struggle with PTSD throughout life, please know there is hope. First and foremost, there is hope in Christ. There's healing in Him. So if you're not a praying person, become a praying person. Just start praying. And I promise you, you're going to start seeing and experiencing what true healing really looks like. And you're going to start finding out that these PTSD symptoms aren't something that break you. They're something that make you. And you're going to do great. You're going to do amazing things. Just don't quit. Don't give up. Keep fighting. The more you fight, the stronger you become. And I'm here to help anybody. So feel free to reach out to me, like we said, on Facebook and Instagram. And I'd love, even if it's just to pray for you, I'd be happy to pray for you, or to offer a word of encouragement. I'd be happy to do that. I understand the struggle. I understand the fight, and you're not alone in it. We're all here with you. So.
Amen. I second every bit of that. Thank you so much, Jonny. This has been your episode. It's Your Suffering from PTSD, What Now? With Jonny Benton. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you, Marcy.
You're welcome.